you get to a point, like when you first get into it, you're like, I want to, the whole goal is catching fish. And you're like totally like focused on like you just
for
trying
sure.
to catch a fish.
It's all about the performance.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then like you get to a point where you realize like, actually like that is not the point at all. And sometimes even catching a fish is disruptive to just like being in there.
Yeah. There's a Zen moment where you're like, okay.
Like, I actually don't want to catch a fish right now. I'm like being in my own head right now. This is really cool.
And it's once I was able to like, that was huge for me. When I was able to let go of having to, I don't know, be goal oriented. There's so many metaphors that come to mind. But when I had to let go of being goal oriented and catching the fish and being proud of coming, I was able to just be. Honestly, I fished a lot better.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I was able to treat it as the relaxation it was.
Yeah.
I can't count how many times in trying to just force it to happen, to control this uncertainty, and just force a fish to come out of the water. And it didn't make it any easier when my father-in-law's like, oh, every 5 minutes. Oh,
yeah.
So, but it's good.
There's a lot of lessons in there in life.
I think so.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a great book, Standing in a River and Waving a Stick, that talks about a lot of those lessons. Good stuff.
That's cool. Well, how are you? Tell us about Share My Health, your journey. You've been incredibly supportive and engaged in our efforts in the mental health issues that are happening here in the state of Utah, within the tech community in particular. Tell us about you and I mean, you're everywhere and we're putting you on stage a lot, but like now let's get into who you are.
I love that. Like you, I love stories and I find people fascinating. And I honestly, I look forward to relaxing and having a good conversation. I'm a classically trained nerd who spends most of his time working with people by choice. I love working with people. And so this space of understanding technology to a certain degree, and then at the same time trying to, with as much compassion and empathy as I can muster, understand what's going on for somebody and think, okay, how can by typing or writing or designing something, how can I make a difference in my limited way? Early on, I was interested in games, loved video games. My dad would bring home Pong, we're talking the 70s, and I'd figure out some way to wire it up and get the UHF and VHF tuned just right. And I was like the Pong master, 6, 7 years old. I could get it working on almost any TV. People would call me for support. It was so empowering.
That's so cool.
But beyond that modest, career, I was fascinated about, well, how are the graphics actually appearing on the screen? What is causing, when I turn this dial, what's causing it to react? If there's a delay, why the delay? And I would mess the UHF and VHF up and try to, I would try to play a game while it was, and so getting into it and how it worked, I spent a lot of time in stand-up arcades in the early 80s and was just fascinated. So I thought, I got to know how video games work. A lot of my mentors growing up were also healthcare professionals. And so I thought, ooh, healthcare is pretty cool too. And I got to the point where I had studied quite a bit of computer science in high school. Shout out to Kathy Green at East High School. And had just an amazing mentoring experience there and pursued that in college with wonderful scholarship thanks to you. And reached a point in undergrad of like, okay, am I going to go entertainment? Because I've been studying art and ray tracing and computer graphics and scientific visualization.
Like you were thinking maybe like build games?
Like hardcore building games.
Yeah, that's way
like,
cool.
How do they work? I wanted to make them work.
Yeah.
And, all the different things that go into a studio these days. And then the other path was healthcare. I was in pre-med for a year, the chemistry and all the other things you need to do in the physics and so on. And then I saw Clint and Care on TV one day in the chemistry building, and I thought, well, that scares the pants off me. And back then I was naive enough to think I can't be an entrepreneur if I'm going to be working for a hospital just on a daily salary job.
Wait, tell me what Clint and Care is. I don't know.
And I have all the respect in the world for physicians who have found a beautiful way of being entrepreneurial, despite what I then feared in my young mind. So Clint and Care was the precursor to Obamacare.
Oh, you're talking like Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Well, so there's, I guess my gray is showing. Sorry.
No. Yeah. We forget the Bill Clinton years to our own peril, actually. I mean, we had a balanced budget, we had a surplus, like all that type of stuff's got pretty wild.
I yearn for some of that stability. I really do.
Yeah.
But back then I was afraid. So I said, no, I still want to do something healthcare adjacent and went with computer science. So for grad school, I was thinking, okay, MBA or medical informatics or computer science. I still chose computer science. So I wanted to stay hardcore tech. And, but I reached a fork at the end of my undergrad where I had a job with Sculptured Software, great company. They make Twisted Metal series, and I had a job in sound effects and in graphics for them. And I was going to be, working on their new titles, but that was a time in the industry where it was just a grind. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be really late for dinner a lot. And then some capricious deadline gets set, and I'm going to be really late for dinner for 8 months or 6 months or whatever. Or I could go into healthcare and say, well, I'm not going to be a doctor, but at least I can play working with one on TV.
Mm-hmm.
I chose that route. And the reason was that I was bouncing around in the back of a missionary transfer van in the Philippines. And I was being transferred from the field into the office to work on the computers for the mission. Well, it just dawned on me as I was bouncing around northeast of Manila that I was really going to miss working with the people. I didn't see that coming. And I thought, wow, I can't stand being behind a desk my whole career.
Yeah.
And what I learned later is that I was good at it. I mean, I had some good job offers from some prestigious organizations. But I was like, I'm kind of better on the people side. And so there's a lot of people who can do things better than I can. One of my friends went onto a studio and he was responsible for all the clouds in Shrek and anything that looked like a cloud, if you catch my meaning. And so I thought, every time I see an animated movie, I go, yep, oh, that would have been me. And I'm really glad that I chose a path not trodden. What I did is I worked for a Ray Norda company, part of the Canopy Group way back in the day.
Of course.
And called Applied Medical Informatics. And that was after Alpha Graphics, where I got married. I was a copy jockey. And then in working tech support at good old Sterling Wentworth downtown, a financial software company, I really got into developing artificial intelligence in the 90s for software, for healthcare. And it was addictive because as we were studying how software can help doctors make better decisions, we'd have stories coming back, for example, from Texas, that our software helped save a life because it recognized that the person with all their needs was pretty likely to have rabies. Yeah. And that wasn't even on the doctor's mind.
Yeah.
And as you know, that's something you got to treat pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so our software, like the code we wrote, helped save somebody's life. Oh, so much dopamine. It was like, well, that's such a cool thing. And so I continued in that realm. And so for me, I did it for a few years for a number of different companies, Times Mirror Corporation, Mosby Matthew Bender, and then a group called SunQuest. It used to be here based in Research Park. Mm-hmm. Excellent group. Homer Warner Jr., Homer Warner Sr. is who I studied under, as well as Homer Warner Jr. These are two folks that were at the heart of early electronic medical records with Stan Huff and Reed Gardner and others. And so really deep into the nuts and bolts of how does an electronic health record work. And then I got into hospital systems and how's the glue and the data fitting all those together. So getting plenty of my nerd on, but I got to the point where like, okay, I can do this. I can act as an architect. Then I shifted to being more product management and architecture because I felt like I could express the problems that I saw and that I could be more effective as a force multiplier to help the teams see the challenges and get them done. And so I started to be attracted more and more to the problems that are the realm of the meeting rooms and the boardrooms, as opposed to the problems that I would have in front of my computer, as delicious and wonderful as they are to solve. So I had to choose. And that led me to solving some pretty big scale problems for healthcare in a variety of states and so on. Our software is still running at Mass Gen Hospital in Massachusetts, for example, and doing some of that. So project by project, I really became interested in that. So because I liked the people side, I branched off and did consulting, started a company called Veracity Solutions. Not the Veracity we know and love here, but the one up north. Yeah. And John Esser is now running that, doing a fantastic job. And thus began about 20 years of consulting, then shifted into, after helping build hundreds of products for companies like Microsoft, Adobe, Logitech, and a who's who of healthcare companies like GE and beyond. I was like, okay, I can begin to see how the decisions I make, the most important of which we're choosing the right team members, right? I think that's one of the things that we learn the most as leaders is if we need a superpower, it's identifying those around us who can do things much better than we can, and getting the right enabling environment, and then you're moving obstacles out of their way.
Yeah.
So if I'm good at anything, it's that. And I saw the number of lives that we were impacting and how we would do it. And honestly, through hardship, the inevitable difficulties and sweat and tears and blood of startups, I started to learn how to be more confident in representing my team's capabilities.
Mm.
And we went from smaller projects to still larger ones, and then started doing some larger scale projects overall. And it's easy to attach one's identity too much to work, and I really try not to do that. My kids still tell me, "Okay, Dad, you know, you still got to work on that, buddy. You're a little too happy that deal closed, so you just
That's
you
awesome.
calm it down," because they know that when the deal doesn't close,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but I started to see that, and I'm a great copycat, and I would see others doing some things that I aspired to do, and I guess my career now is trying to make a big difference doing small things.
Mm.
You know, I think we, like Mother Teresa said, we can't really do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
Yeah.
And as a result, you know, I try to choose in my limited time, or the finite number of keystrokes that I have left in my life, how do I make a difference on the smallest things that will make the biggest impact? That's what leads me to mental health. Not only my own journey and being a survivor, struggling myself with ADD, with depression, with anxiety, which are wonderful gifts and companions, my old friends. But also, you know, as a trauma survivor, there's so much that I've learned and been mentored into mental health, and I know that sits behind so many other maladies. So that's a key passion. You and I have talked about that plenty. But also, I try to look more broadly and think, what are the other diseases? What are the other sufferings and conditions that cause death and suffering? And if I were to choose a small number of things, where would I spend my time?
Yeah.
And so that's led us into the humanitarian space in nutrition for children and mothers, as well as now it's expanding into motherhood care, not only in the U.S., but actually in about 24 other countries.
Mm.
So we're blessed to continue to make a difference in small ways. And again, by the partnerships that we form, by the friendships that we form, hopefully some of what we do takes root. And I don't care if my name is remembered, but I hope that some of the lives we've changed will be better for it.
Well, you've already saved lives through your technology and all these various things. I mean, there's no question about it. Your name will be remembered. I promise you that.
That wasn't false modesty. I guess what I'm trying to say is...
No, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Like, so as you look at the state of Utah and our current, what I think is a crisis in mental health, right? Like, really during the pandemic, post-pandemic is where it started becoming even more glaring. I mean, there were obviously signs, and not like it didn't exist pre all that, but during and post-pandemic, it feels different. It feels far more on everybody's sleeve. Like it's, everybody's struggling with this is my sense. What do we do about that?
Ooh, that is a brilliant question. So let's pick apart we for a moment.
Yeah.
All of us, I believe in pretty much a horizontal world. There's not a hierarchy. We all struggle. And it's critical in self-compassion to rejoin the human race, to realize all of us are struggling with something. We've all had difficult childhoods. You've been gracious in the past to share much of yours. And I've shared a little of mine on occasion, not ashamed to talk about it. I think, in fact, we as a society need to talk about those things more, so that they're brought out into the light and not hidden in shame and guilt and all kinds of compaction and the wrong kind of compound interest. So I would say we, meaning everybody for a moment. I think we can notice, talk, and act. This is a triad that the American Psychiatric Association put together with, let me see if I get this right, J.P. Morgan, American Express, and Paramount. They wanted to have no more than 35 minutes of training for employees in their multinational corporations. And their main takeaway was notice, talk, act. There are other wonderful approaches that are out there, but that's become my most favorite and brief. And I try to practice that when I'm thinking, if I notice that somebody else is struggling, make it okay to talk about it. Of course, choose the right moment, read the room,
Mm-hmm.
and find some time away. And it's not that by my words I'm going to change how you feel. But what on the receiving side, I can definitely say that just having somebody sit by me to say, dude, I'm here. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
say anything. You can punch the wall. You can cry. You can just feel all the feels. But having somebody there combats the monsters of isolation and loneliness. And then the ACT side is, we're not clinicians. I'm not a clinician,
Yeah, I'm certainly not.
but how do we take action and recommend that somebody get the help that they need? That comes on a variety of levels. Talk to somebody who is a professional. Call 988. Let's call 988 together. So in medical circles, we often talk about referrals versus linkage. If I'm referring, it's like, hey, here's a good idea. Think about it. And I'm going to work to persuade and love and follow up. But there's a time at which you're hoping somebody acts on that.
Mm-hmm.
Link, however, is let's go do this together. And actually, let's not part till I know that you're good and you know that I'm good and that you're in good hands. Sometimes that means going to the hospital. Sometimes it means going to the great facilities like Huntsman Mental Health Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it means just sitting down and looking over the valley and a good sunset or a good sunrise, taking a hike. There are a number of things, but that link, that connection is so vital with mental health because the number one lie is you're alone and nobody else is going through what you're going through.
Yeah.
So when we notice, and I think we're becoming particularly more adept at noticing, both because people are more open about it, it's on our sleeves, if you will, but they're more okay with it being on our sleeves. We've normalized mental health. Much like we have neurodivergence and other things, we've got so much work to do on stigma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Christina Huntsman and others will shout from the rooftops about how much more stigma we need to reduce with, Promise to Live and all of our friends in that space. But if we notice and we can talk about it and then act, those are very simple things that we generally can do. As leaders of organizations, I've got still more ideas, but I wanted to pause for station identification. Back to you.
No, tell me the ideas. I really am like genuinely, I mean, obviously we're looking at this, trying to do as much as we can, but I also get concerned like, hey, what if we did something that was like, made things worse? Like, I really do worry about that as much as I worry about like I'm sure you've heard of like Chesterton's fence. Have you heard of like G.K. Chesterton? He's like
Teach me now. Oh, I've heard of G.K. Chesterton, but teach me. I don't know this.
Yeah, there's this thing where he writes some column. I mean, the dude wrote incredible everything. Wrote thousands of essays, bunch of books, all that type of stuff. But there's one.
You ought to know about good writing.
Yeah, there's one that says where he's like talking to it's like some like the reformer comes and says, "Hey, I want to tear down this fence." And the person's like, "Well, why does that fence exist?" The person's like, "I don't know, but I want to tear it down."
Yeah.
And then the person's like, "Well, go back, learn why that fence exists, and then maybe I'll let you tear it down." And that's what I think about when, like, as Silicon Slopes, as organizations and all that type of stuff. Sometimes we're very quick to like jump in and like, all right, let's tear that fence down, without understanding like why that fence was there in the first place.
It's really interesting that we approach those moments with fences, with people, with as much curiosity as we can muster and as little judgment as we can muster. I get it right about 30% of the time. And yet to be around people who are with empathy and compassion, doing the hard work of listening and saying, well, why does this institution work the way that it does? Why is there in the hospital such a thing as a pink slip and a blue slip? And how does that whole process work? What is involuntary institutionalization like? And at what point is that used? It is a terribly horrible weapon. At what point should therapy be on the table? And is it scary? Is it right? What's the role of medication? There are so many assumptions that we all come into healthcare and certainly mental health with that it's hard to, I don't know what your experience is, but it's hard for me to make sense of sometimes. Hopefully I'm getting better at that. But what I see in in your analogy of Chesterton's fence is that, well, maybe I'll have a Robert Frost moment, and that there is what's the old phrase about a wall? Somebody will get it. We'll get it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But this nice idea that some walls those boundaries can build good neighbors. Leaving metaphor, it's easy to rail against, for example, the high cost of inpatient care for substance abuse or
Yeah.
substance use
Yeah.
disorder. And so having, had family members, extended and otherwise, who have experienced that, some parts of me are like, man, that's expensive. Man, it's like, how do people afford this? And there's this sense of raging against the machine. And while that irreverence is, I think, healthy, I've talked to so many facility owners who are struggling just to make it work. The turnover of their caregivers is high, and they want to put food on the table, but they know that it's going to take quality care to provide it. And we're dealing with an aging healthcare system that, for example, a lot of plans are so-called grandfathered in under the Affordable Care Act, which means they only need to provide a minimum amount of mental health services, 20 days, and for example, on some plans. And every session you have of therapy is 1 day. If I go an hour, if I go to an hour to say 5 weeks of therapy, that's 5 days off of my credit list. And so if I now have a loved one who needs to go into an institution, I only have 15 days left. And despite how artfully you might write an appeal letter, it's highly unlikely that you'll get an appeal for more, despite all you try to say about the benefits of mental health on all the other aspects of health. And so you're shelling out a lot out of pocket, or looking for loans or other wonderful institutions. There's great organizations. If anybody listening is a leader of one of these institutions, there's a great company called FinPay that creates payment solutions for employers and for facility owners to find a way to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Financing that's affordable, that allows a person to receive the treatment that they need long enough, right? So there's all kinds of institutional fences that need, an appropriate amount of curiosity, but then some hard
Be torn down.
some hard looks at them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it torn down?
Rebuilt?
Reformed? Rebuilt? Something. Maybe I'll get in trouble with my siblings for this, or my kids anyway. I believe that rules are meant to be questioned, and it doesn't mean I'm entitled, but it means that I try to look at things and say, well, somebody created that rule at some point. Somebody created that fence.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
And what good is it?
Yeah.
And what is it doing? And what can I preserve about its original intent? Because the situation has changed, and go on. Another concrete example might be just mental health services within a company in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing enough as employers? Those of us that have stewardship over the lives and loves of the families we serve, are we doing enough to help their mental health? Are we leading by example? I was in a seminar for the National Association of, I've officially messed it up. They're awesome people. And a client. Sorry, guys. We'll call it stage fright. The National Council of Mental Wellbeing. Thank you, brain. And the National Council had a guest speaker, and she asked pointedly, this is 2021. So we're all dealing with an excitement level of mental health. 40% of adults are reporting significant levels of depression and anxiety. That's thankfully gone down now to the low 30s. That's still a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, she asked pointedly, how many of you leaders, when you do see a doctor, when you see a therapist, actually put on your calendar, I'm going to therapy? I was like, shoot, I love therapy. I've been going to therapy since I was 13. This is great. And they always freaking put doctor or out or something like that. And I thought, okay, I need to do a better job of leading by example. Even that small thing was a cue to say, I can do my part to normalize, to reduce stigma. And so now I've got a few team members who have chosen to use their calendars in that way. There's nothing mandatory, but who have chosen to use their calendars that way. and without undue celebration, whether it's taking them to the side or just, if it's in public, I'll respond in public. One individual said the other day, I can't do that. I can't make that meeting because I'll be in a therapy session. I said, fantastic. You're in the right spot. We will work around that always. And in just creating this space where a family issue or depression is just the same as getting stitches or a broken leg or a migraine, because in reality, there's such a mind-body connection. And by becoming more aware and just the small acts of notice, talk, act, and then frankly, tear down the walls that need to be torn down in our businesses and our society and beyond. Now, we can't have chaos. I think the rules are meant to be there. To your Chesterton story, I like the martial arts concept of shuhari. You come across that.
Mm-hmm.
So for listeners who may not have heard that, I'll do my poor layman's job. First, to learn the rules, shu, ha, to be the rules, let them really sink in, and then redefine, or as I think it's called, break the rules. And so you've got to spend the appropriate amount of time with the right level of mastery to be able to say, now I understand, and make the right changes.
Yeah.
Too often, even on college campuses these days, we call for canceling what we don't understand. And I think that's short-sighted in many directions.
No, it's absurd, honestly. I bumped into something similar along these lines recently, found out that there was $2.8 million in school lunch debt in the state of Utah.
Okay. I read about that
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, there's $2.8 million of school lunch debt. And that means like some kids are getting turned away because they have negative balances. Some cafeteria workers are stepping up and actually just paying the lunch of these kids and like all of these types of things. And so we jumped in, Silicon Slopes, and said like, hey, well, let's solve this. 2.8 million doesn't seem like a big number in the state of Utah. And if we're talking about feeding our kids.
It's $1 per citizen almost.
But the interesting thing is like, why is that a problem in the first place? Mm-hmm. And getting to the bottom of that, like, because there's no way that, at least I don't believe, there's no way that that's intentional by anybody. That kids would be getting turned away for breakfast or lunch, or
you end up in these
stigmatized ruts, or all these types of things. So like the why needs to be explored more than, not more, but just as much as the solution. Like the solution is obvious. So, all right, well, let's just pay these off, right? But why solves it forever, right? Rather than just like these little Band-Aid solutions.
I grew up as one of those kids.
Same.
And so we know what it's like to receive the benefit as well as to kind of feel the squeeze, sometimes the guilt, the pressure. I'm going into school with my blue ticket, my green ticket, and grateful that I have food. Thank God I had the food that I did, because it allowed me to get the education that I needed. And I love my parents. We were going through an extended rough time. And there were enough of us, we'd kind of band together. I went to South High for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so we'd go and we'd be those little kids with the backpacks like turtles going through the hallways. And we'd get our big, massive burritos for 35 cents and, completely subsidized. But there were enough of us who were like, okay, this is cool.
Mm.
And when my kids have had lunch debts that have been beyond. First of all, I've been grateful for the flexibility that they've allowed my kid to eat, even though I didn't top up the account.
And it does seem like that's the default. Like it does seem like it's pretty rare that somebody gets turned.
And I love that. What's happening, I believe, and I'm not an expert in this, but what I believe is that the school system is floating those debts, and at a certain point they can't hold it. They can't do that. Now, I'm sure there's elasticity within each school district, even the state level, to allow for such, and certainly subsidies that exist that you and I benefited from.
Mm-hmm.
But it persists. And so my child, all of my children, all 4 of them, experienced a time where mom or dad wasn't wise enough to top it up, and they chose not to eat because they didn't want to have the uncomfortable experience going through that with whomever was around, or even just one-on-one, saying, sorry, I can't do it. Exactly.
Yeah. And
so there are all kinds of knock-on effects for this. As we look at the why of it, again, I can't speak to the why. But like you, I'm sure that you're not just saying, hey, let's pay a 2.8 million check and then create something year over year over year. But let's get to the bottom of it. What needs to be true for us to go upstream? Or as agilists love to say, move to the left, right? Let's understand what's at the root of this and then try to solve those problems, because this is really just a symptom.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is a Band-Aid. I mean, it's cool, and we should.
No knock on that. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, but it is a Band-Aid. It's not a solution.
But this notion of sustainability comes up over and over again. Without the Band-Aid, people are they're living in Maslow's basement, and they can't raise their eyes to the horizon. I'm going to see how many metaphors I can mix in one sentence.
Yeah, this is cool.
We're in too much pain, either as those in need or those caring for those in need. And if we can relieve the pain for long enough, even if it's a Band-Aid, that allows us to pause and say, okay, now how do we fix this?
Yeah.
And so I think what you're doing is beautiful, and I encourage everyone to support it in the ways that they can. A lot of the nonprofit organizations that we work with have taken it upon themselves to say, how do we build systems that mean that we can move on and solve other problems, leaving in our wake more functional, healthy systems that, according to systems theory and Eli Goldratt and the like, they're going to break down again. Other constraints will crop up, other bottlenecks will be there, but at least the ones that are there will have some root cause solution. Well, what I've loved to see, and this I learned through sad experience, because in my early nonprofit fundraising, I was like, there's a problem, let's go solve it. And I was all about the immediacy, and it's true, it needs to be there. But the nonprofits we were trying to raise for also have the dual charter of creating sustainability.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a fascinating question. And so we're trying to look at that in some of our nonprofit work full circle and say, how do we measure whether we're actually getting better at those core indicators? We're not alone by any means, but we try to look at any contribution that's made in kind or in dollars and say, all right, how much of this is going towards solving the root causes? I know of some significant donors who just want to see 98 cents out of every dollar go straight to those who need it most. Mm-hmm. And they miss really critical ideas. I'm going to really try hard to not start quoting the great work Uncharitable here, but a shout out to Uncharitable and that amazing movie and work. But they miss the idea that a certain percentage of it needs to be spent on solving the problem, not just addressing the symptoms. So prevention, not just treatment. And if we spent, I don't know, 25, even if we spent 10% of all of our donations on doing research to then publish what works and what doesn't, every dollar would go farther. We recently got a clarion call from the United Nations to all donors for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs of the World Health Organization, to say to all donors, please allocate not 0.8%, so less than 1%, of your funds toward strengthening the data systems in your efforts. For every dollar invested in data systems and therefore health systems strengthening, it yields $32 in dividend. That's an amazing return because you're enabling visibility, velocity, and value. And maybe I'll sub-close on this idea that a good friend of mine, Sam Christie, taught me that it's hard to create value unless we can do so repeatedly. And it's hard to do so repeatedly unless we can understand what's going on. And so this triad he taught me, which I believe is a wonderful push against a flywheel, is you first have to make an issue visible. You have to know about it. People have to be aware of it. And only then can you band together, get in the same room as other people who care about that problem as much as you do, and figure out that nobody knows what the hell they're doing perfectly. We're all trying to figure this out. But get in the same room as those who care about it as much as you do and try to make a change, and then try to make that change repeatedly. You'll gain some velocity from that visibility. And only then do you create value after you've created some lasting, yes, sustainable work. So an immediate need, the crisis, the acute, is absolutely essential. We wouldn't say to a person drowning, swim harder, learn to swim, now's the time. We throw them a life vest, we jump in, we carry whatever we need to do. And so it's essential that we do that. And then over time, build towards self-reliance. I love the metaphor of taking medication for mental health, that the medication's like a life vest, and therapy teaches us how to swim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is beautiful. The good thing about the Band-Aid is it, more than anything, is it brings attention to that fact that there's a problem.
It does.
Right?
And that visibility
The visibility
is
is the big piece. And then, like, as long as that's taken and it's not like, well, let's just do this every year and not find out why it's even happening. It would be crazy, but at least it gives some visibility.
If I could, just briefly, that a couple of my favorite visibility stats in a workplace, 1 out of every 3 people is struggling with significant mental health. That's a high visibility stat, and you can count around a room in any meeting. Another stat is that every 10,000 person company is spending at least $57 million annually for the costs of mental health and people not taking medications as prescribed. So raising the visibility of some of these costs that employers are already paying and recognizing that we can absolutely reduce that cost, right back to the small things, medications, mental health, choosing the meds that I want to take and taking them consistently, having a better culture that's more well-being oriented and so on. There are small and simple things that we can do that make a huge difference. And finally, 2 sobering ones, and I apologize if these are shocking, but I think they're important to understand, that every 2 minutes a woman dies from maternal complications. And I might get this wrong, but every 10 seconds, a child dies from malnutrition. And malnutrition is at the root cause of, despite all the other conditions that we might want to say, that are happening, malaria and so on, but malnutrition is a primary contributing factor to 45% of all child deaths under 5 worldwide. So more than half the kids are dying from an entirely preventable issue. So these moments of visibility allow us to say, oh, wow, okay, we can do something with that clarity. We can build on the velocity and really create some lifetime value. We may not change the world, but we're going to change the world for one of those kids.
Yeah. I don't know how we can top that, so that's probably a good place to end. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you.
Always great to talk to you. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks for everything you're doing with us on the mental health issue. And let's have you back on, my friend.
I would love that. Cool. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take good care.